A billionaire invites his ex-girlfriend to his wedding, only for her to arrive with a little girl who looks just like him. What she reveals in front of everyone changes everything. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Soul Stories. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the name of the city you're watching from. Now, let's dive into the story. Morning in California was eerily quiet. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a soft golden hue over the small apartment. The air still carried a lingering trace of last night's mist, but the sky, now a clear shade of blue, signaled the beginning of a new day. On an old wooden table, amid scattered fashion magazines and a few unfinished sketches, lay a wedding invitation. Printed on ivory paper with intricate embossed details, it exuded an air of elegance, yet also a quiet sense of distance. At the top, the names of the bride and groom shimmered in gold lettering. Grant Westwood and Madeline Sinclair. Talia Robinson stood before it, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the paper's edge. A heavy silence stretched between her and the invitation, as if time itself had paused. She had thought she was strong enough to face this. For 6 years, she had taught herself to live with the pain, to bury the memories she once believed were long gone. But now, with that name before her, everything came rushing back, like an old wound ripped open by a sudden gust of wind, sharp and unrelenting. God had tested her in so many ways. But why wouldn't he grant her peace even now? Talia pressed her lips together, her fingers absently tracing Grant's name. The same name she had once written over and over in the margins of her notebooks. The same name she had whispered into the silence of countless lonely nights. The same name she had fought so hard to forget, only to see it now, not in a promise, but in a farewell. She closed her eyes. The calm she had spent years building wavered, fragile as a candle's flame against the wind. Outside, birds perched on the power lines, chirping carelessly, oblivious to the turmoil inside. A gentle breeze slipped through the open window, rustling the invitation ever so slightly, as if mocking the woman standing frozen in silent agony. Talia opened her eyes, her gaze steadier now. She could not keep running. She had spent her youth loving Grant, and the years after that trying to forget him. But there was one undeniable truth. She was no longer living for herself alone. From behind the bedroom door, the sound of tiny footsteps pattered against the wooden floor. The door creaked open, followed by a small, bright voice. "Mommy, what are we having for breakfast?" Talia turned. A little girl stood in the doorway, her chestnut curls falling gently around her face, her blue eyes wide and sparkling like a sunlit lake. Those eyes, too familiar, too much like the man on that invitation. Talia smiled, even as her heart ached. This little girl was the only reason she was still standing, no matter how many times the world had turned its back on her. God had given her a gift, a piece of the love she and Grant once shared. But now it was time. Milan deserved to know the truth. 6 years ago, a light rain draped New York City in a delicate mist, turning the cobblestone streets outside Parsons School of Design into a glistening mosaic. Inside a small cafe on the corner, the rich aroma of espresso blended with the sweet scent of warm cinnamon waffles. Talia Robinson sat by the window, her slender fingers flipping through the pages of a fashion magazine. She tilted her head slightly, loose curls cascading over one shoulder, her deep brown eyes fixed on the glossy images. But even at a glance, it was clear her mind was elsewhere. A familiar voice broke through her daze. "Stop pretending to read. You were waiting for me, weren't you?" She looked up, and there he was, Grant Westwood. That self-assured smile, those piercing blue eyes, like the ocean at the height of summer. He wore a dark blue button-down, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, paired with tailored trousers and a Patek Philippe watch resting on his wrist. He carried the effortless grace of someone born into wealth. But Talia had never been drawn to his status. It was the way he looked at her, soft, teasing, yet utterly sincere. She smiled, setting the magazine aside. "Who said I was waiting for you?" Grant slid into the seat across from her, loosening the top button of his shirt. "So you weren't." She hesitated for just a second, then shook her head, her tone playfully indifferent. "Not at all." Grant chuckled, his gaze flickering with amusement, as if he could see straight through her lie. Leaning forward, he rested his arms on the table, voice lowering into something more intimate. "Talia, do you know how many miracles God has created? But I'm certain the most beautiful one he ever gave me is you." His words curled around her like warmth on a winter's day. Talia had always considered herself strong, but even she wasn't immune to the way he spoke about her, as if she was his entire world. She turned toward the rain-speckled window, watching droplets dance against the glass. She had never believed in fairy tales, but since meeting Grant, she had begun to wonder, maybe, just maybe, God had written a special story just for them. Grant reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers before gently lacing them together. Warm, steady, as if once he held her, he would never let go. His voice softened. "I know my family doesn't approve of us." A shadow crossed his expression. "But that doesn't matter. I told God, if he let me find you, I would never lose you." Talia's breath caught. She knew their love was never meant to be easy. A black girl from a modest background, a golden boy from a family of wealth and power. They were two parallel lines that were never meant to cross. But Grant had never once made her feel undeserving. He had always made her believe that their love was stronger than the world that wanted to keep them apart. Talia squeezed his hand, smiling softly. "Then you'll never lose me, right?" Grant held her gaze, as if etching this moment into his soul. "Never." Talia remembered that day all too well, the day her world fell apart. That day, New York was swallowed by the late autumn chill. The sky was overcast, and crimson maple leaves blanketed the cobblestone streets, painting a picture so breathtakingly beautiful that it almost felt cruel. But to her, there was nothing beautiful about that day. She sat alone in their usual cafe, but this time Grant wasn't there. The chair across from her was empty, save for a cup of coffee that had long gone cold and the way her fingers twisted together in anxious anticipation. She waited, her heart burning with unease. And then Henry Westwood arrived. He entered like an icy wind cutting through her life. An imposing man with silver hair, a flawless tailored suit, and sharp eyes devoid of warmth. Talia had heard plenty about Henry Westwood, the formidable head of the Westwood financial empire, a man powerful enough to make all of New York tread carefully around him. But it wasn't until now, sitting face to face with him, that she truly understood why they called him the silver fox of the elite. He pulled out a chair, no pleasantries, no pretense of kindness. His voice was calm, yet cutting. "You're a smart woman, Talia, so I trust you understand why I'm here." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "I don't believe I need to sit here and listen to threats." Henry let out a quiet chuckle, void of amusement. "Threats? No, my dear. I'm simply stating facts. And the fact is, Grant will never choose you." Her chest tightened, but she refused to show weakness. She met his gaze, unwavering. "You don't get to decide that." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his presence suffocating. "Then tell me, what will you do when I say Grant is already engaged?" Her breath hitched. "You're lying." "Am I?" He placed a photograph on the table. In it, Grant stood beside a poised blonde woman, Madeline Sinclair. Her arm looped around his, her smile soft and composed. The perfect couple by society's standards. Our family chose Madeline for Grant long ago. He knows that, and no matter how much he tries to rebel, in the end, he will do what is expected of him. Henry's gaze bore into her, each word laced with cruel certainty. "We're nothing more than a detour." The words struck like a blow to her ribs. No, it couldn't be true. Grant had told her he loved her. He had promised he would never leave her. But now, the truth sat in front of her, captured in an undeniable image. She wanted to scream that Henry was wrong, that Grant would never betray her like this. But how could she be sure? Grant had never spoken to Madeline, never once mentioned an arranged marriage. Henry must have seen the flicker of doubt in her eyes, because he delivered the final cut, his voice smooth, deliberate. "Do you know why Grant loves you?" He tilted his head slightly, as if speaking to a child. "Because you are a beautiful dream, something unattainable in his real world. But everyone has to wake up eventually." A pause, a sigh, faint sympathy. "If you truly love Grant, you'll let him go." Her lips felt dry. She wanted to fight, to run to Grant, to demand that he tell her this was all a lie. But what if it wasn't? And then the final blow landed. Henry slid a blank check across the table. "Write any number you want. In exchange, you walk away from Grant. Forever." Silence. For the first time in her life, Talia felt the crushing weight of power and wealth suffocating her. She could fight against prejudice, but how could she fight against an entire dynasty that had already decided Grant's fate before he was even born? She rose to her feet, her legs unsteady. "I don't want your money." Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes remained defiant. "I will leave. Not because of you, but because I will never stay with a man who isn't willing to fight for me." And with that, she walked away. She left behind the blank check. She left behind the love she had once thought was her destiny. "God, please give me the strength to forget him." But God did not answer, because later that night, as she pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, she knew she would never be able to forget. Talia sat at the edge of the bed, her gaze resting quietly on her daughter. Milan was curled beneath the blankets, her soft curls falling across her small forehead. There was something achingly peaceful about the way she slept, yet to Talia, it was also a reminder, a piece of the past she could never erase. The warm glow of the bedside lamp cast gentle shadows across the room. Tonight was still, yet inside, Talia's heart was anything but calm. The wedding invitation still lay on the desk, an undeniable testament to the fact that the past she had fought so hard to forget was now waiting for her to face it. She heard footsteps outside. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The door pushed open, and her brother, Jeremiah, stepped inside, arms crossed over his chest. Tall, broad-shouldered, and built like a man who had seen too much, Jeremiah Robinson had a face carved with determination. But his eyes held something else entirely. "Worry, so you're really going?" His voice was low, simmering with restrained anger. Talia took a slow breath. "Yes," Jeremiah scoffed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Have you forgotten what he did to you?" She lifted her gaze, meeting his head on. "I have never forgotten." "Then why?" His voice dropped, thick with frustration, with something close to pain. "He has everything. But you? You had to raise Milan alone for 6 years. 2 jobs, sleepless nights when she had a fever, scraping by just to keep a roof over your heads. Where's he then, Talia? Where was Grant when you needed him?" Her fingers curled into fists. She had no answer. Jeremiah took a step forward, bracing both hands against the desk, his voice firmer now. "He doesn't deserve to be a father, and you know that." Talia lowered her head, but she did not look away. Because he was right. She had done it all alone. But Milan deserved the truth. She swallowed hard, then lifted her chin, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Milan has the right to know who her father is." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Jeremiah stilled, his jaw tightening, his eyes flashing cold. "The right to know a man who abandoned her before she was even born." Talia shook her head. "No, the right to know that she was never unwanted. The right to know she wasn't a mistake." She rose to her feet, stepping toward the window, her gaze drifting to the night sky. The stars shimmered against the darkness, watching over her, listening to the words she could barely bring herself to say. "Jeremiah, I have prayed for so long. I wanted to forget. I convinced myself that Milan only needed me. But then I realized I can't take this choice away from her. If Grant knows the truth, maybe he'll walk away. Maybe he won't want to be a father. But at the very least, she deserves to know. I won't let her grow up with an emptiness inside her, never knowing why." A heavy silence fell between them. Jeremiah inhaled sharply, turning his face away. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a warning. "Then tell me, Are you ready to be hurt all over again? Talia closed her eyes. She didn't know if she was strong enough to survive it a second time. But if God had led her to this moment, then she had to believe he would give her the strength to face whatever came next. The grand wedding of Grant Westwood and Madeline Sinclair was unfolding in the opulent estate of the Westwood family. Distinguished guests, shimmering evening gowns, and the clinking of crystal wine glasses blended together to create a spectacle of luxury, one that seemed almost ethereal, like something out of a fairy tale. But amid all the grandeur, beyond the golden glow of perfection, a door was about to open, carrying with it a past that Grant never expected. Dusk painted the New York skyline in hues of amber and gold, reflecting off the towering glass windows of the Westwood estate. The sprawling gardens were adorned with twinkling fairy lights, casting a dreamlike glow over the centuries-old oaks. Everything, the setting, the atmosphere, felt meticulously crafted, as though it had been plucked straight from the pages of storybook. Inside the grand hall, every detail was flawlessly arranged. Rows of pristine white-clothed tables stretched across the room, each adorned with delicate French roses, their deep crimson petals adding a touch of regal splendor. A jazz band played softly in the background, weaving an air of sophistication and warmth into the night. The guests were the elite, the titans of finance, politics, and high society. To them, extravagance was second nature. They raised their glasses, exchanged pleasantries, and smiled in satisfaction, for this was more than just a wedding. This was an alliance, a seamless merging of two of the most powerful families in America. At the center of it all, standing beneath the gilded chandeliers, was Madeline Sinclair. She was a vision in white. Her custom-made lace gown clung elegantly to her slender frame, every intricate stitch crafted to perfection. She was poised, graceful, flawless. And beside her, Grant Westwood, dressed in a sharply tailored black tuxedo. He exuded quiet authority, his striking features chiseled with an air of control. He stood tall, solid, immaculate. Everything was exactly as it should be. And yet, if one looked closely, Grant was not smiling. He wasn't nervous, nor hesitant, but he wasn't happy either. His expression remained composed, unreadable, yet in his eyes, there was something distant, something missing. For weeks, he had heard nothing but congratulations. From his family, his friends, his business partners. Everyone told him he was lucky, that Madeline was perfect for him. And yet, buried beneath layers of expectation, an unease stirred deep within him. Like an undercurrent beneath calm waters. Something was missing, something he couldn't name. From the front row, Henry Westwood watched his son with quiet satisfaction. A man of immense power and calculated precision. He was someone who never left things to chance. And tonight, he could finally rest easy. His son had fallen into place, right where he was meant to be. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bride and groom. The voice of the MC rang out, and the hall erupted in thunderous applause. Grant inhaled deeply, stepping toward Madeline. She smiled at him, a perfect smile for a perfect life. And just as he reached for her hand, the grand doors swung open. A cold gust of wind swept through the grand hall as the massive doors swung open. The dazzling chandeliers cast a golden glow over the aisle, illuminating the delicate white rose petals scattered along the floor. Everything was pristine, flawless. Until now, the perfection shattered. Conversation ceased. Laughter died mid-sentence. Every pair of eyes turned toward the entrance. And then, through the sea of opulence, a woman stepped inside. Talia Robinson. She stood there, clad in a simple beige midi dress, unadorned, understated, yet impossible to overlook. Her soft curls framed her face, her deep brown eyes carrying something unspoken, something no one had anticipated on this day. But what truly sent a ripple of shock through the hall was the little girl holding her hand. A child, no older than 5, with soft chestnut hair, warm golden brown skin, and striking blue eyes. The exact shade of the man standing on the stage. Grant Westwood. For a single moment, time stopped. Grant's gaze locked onto the child, his breath catching in his throat. Those eyes, they were his. Milan glanced up at her mother, sensing the heavy silence pressing down on the room. Her tiny fingers curled tighter around Talia's hand, her innocent gaze flickering between the sea of strangers before her. Henry Westwood was the first to react. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, a mere fracture in his otherwise impenetrable composure. But within seconds, he regained control. With a sharp nod, he signaled the security team. Two men in sleek black suits moved swiftly, heading toward Talia, ready to escort her out, to erase the mistake, to restore the narrative, to cleanse the imperfection before it could stain the perfect night. But Grant had seen, and for the first time since the ceremony began, he truly moved. Without thinking, he stepped off the stage, then walked faster, then ran. "Stop!" His voice was low, commanding, absolute. The security guards froze. Grant kept going until he was standing right in front of her. His breath was uneven, his pulse pounding. But his eyes were locked onto the little girl beside her. He looked at Milan. She looked back at him. Blue eyes met blue eyes. Talia could see it, the precise moment Grant understood. No one spoke. No words were needed. Because in that silence, the truth had already been written in ink darker than any lie could erase. Grant Westwood had just realized he had a daughter. The air in the grand hall felt frozen in time. Every gaze was locked onto the three figures standing at the entrance, where the past and present had collided in a way no one could have foreseen. Grant stood there, facing Talia and the little girl with the same piercing blue eyes that mirrored his own. The entire world seemed to shrink in this single moment. The murmurs in the background faded into nothingness. The dazzling chandeliers lost their brilliance. Only one question echoed in Grant's mind. Why? Why was Talia here? Why did this little girl have his eyes? Grant could see the turmoil in Talia's gaze. He could feel the weight of memories unraveling in his mind, the flood of questions with no answers, the possibilities he had never considered. But she did not look away. She had not come here to run. A small hand tightened around Talia's fingers. Milan clung to her mother's side, timid in the face of so many unfamiliar stares. And then Grant spoke, his voice rough, strained. "What are you doing here?" A simple question, yet burdened with too many emotions to name. Talia met his eyes without hesitation. She had no intention of letting the past be twisted or buried any longer. Steady, unwavering, she lowered herself slightly and placed a gentle hand on Milan's shoulder. "Say hello to your father, Milan." For words, that was all it took to shatter every wall Grant had ever built around himself. His breath stalled. "Father." Milan tilted her face up, her blue eyes locking onto the man before her. She didn't understand everything, but for as long as she could remember, she had asked about her father. And today, her mother had told her this man was him. Milan blinked. Then, in a voice soft as a whisper, she murmured, "Hello, Daddy." Grant staggered back a step. For the first time in his life, Grant Westwood, the man who controlled everything, who made cold, calculated decisions without hesitation, felt like the ground beneath him was slipping away. His heartbeat pounded so loudly he could hear it echoing in his chest. His fists clenched at his sides, as if that was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He didn't know how to react. He didn't know what to say. All he knew was this. He had just lost 6 years of being a father to a child he never even knew existed. The grand ballroom, once dazzling under the glow of crystal chandeliers, suddenly felt suffocating, like an invisible prison. The laughter had faded. The clinking of glasses had ceased. Every guest could only stand still, transfixed by the scene unfolding before them, where the groom of the evening now faced a woman who should not have been here. Grant Westwood's fists clenched, his breaths came hard and fast, his chest rising and falling beneath the fabric of his expensive tuxedo. In mere minutes, his entire world had been turned upside down. "Talia." His voice was low, weighted with something heavy. Talia did not flinch. 6 years, long enough for a woman to grow. long enough for pain to no longer make her tremble. Her eyes met his. Still Grant. Still the same man, with those sharp features, those deep oceanic eyes. But now, there was no warmth in them. Grant stared at her, then shifted his gaze to Milan, the little girl clutching her mother's hand, quietly watching the towering man before her. But Grant couldn't look away from the child. A foreign fear crept into his chest. 6 years without Talia. But more than that, 6 years, and a child had grown up without him knowing. He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "What is this?" Talia tightened her grip on Milan's hand. "You're looking at it, Grant." Her words were simple, but they cut through him like a blade. Silence fell over the room. Grant closed his eyes for a fleeting second, forcing himself to steady. When he opened them again, his gaze was sharp as steel. "You could have told me," he said, his voice strained. "You should have told me." Talia's lips curved into a cold smile. "The way you told me you were marrying someone else." Grant froze. A flicker of anger flashed in his eyes, but beneath it, something else, confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" he gritted out. "I never. Talia, you hid this from me for 6 years. Why? Do you even realize what you've done?" Talia took a slow breath. She had known this moment would come. She had braced herself for it. But standing here, face to face with Grant, the old wounds felt as if they were being torn open. She met his eyes, her voice steady but laced with a deep, aching sorrow. "Do you have any idea how many times I tried to find you, Grant?" He stilled. Talia did not shout. She did not lash out. Yet every word she spoke landed like an accusation. "You think I wanted to leave? You think I wanted to raise her alone?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Grant, you disappeared. You weren't in New York anymore. You didn't answer a single message. I searched for you. I tried to reach you. And all I got was news of your engagement to another woman." Grant's lips parted, but no sound came out. Talia's words struck him like lightning. He hadn't known. He hadn't received even the faintest hint that she had ever looked for him. He had thought she had left, that she had made the choice to sever all ties. But now, standing before her, before the daughter he never knew he had, he realized that maybe things were not what he had believed. "That's impossible," Grant murmured, almost to himself. Talia, I searched for you. I wrote letters. Dozens of them." Talia narrowed her eyes. "And how many of those did I receive?" A chill ran down Grant's spine. Something wasn't right. This couldn't be the truth. Something had happened. And then a voice cut through the tension. "Not a single letter ever reached my sister, Grant." Both Grant and Talia turned sharply. Jeremiah Robinson stood there, his gaze like iron, holding a bundle of old letters in his hands. And in that moment, everything began to shift. The air in the grand hall had never felt heavier. Every eye remained locked on Grant and Talia. But now, a new player had stepped into the unfolding drama, Jeremiah Robinson. He was tall, imposing, his dark eyes burning with fury. Unlike Talia, who maintained an almost unsettling calm, Jeremiah had no intention of holding back his emotions. Striding forward, he stopped in front of Grant and threw a stack of old letters onto the nearby table. The sharp slap of paper against which shattered the tense silence. "Do you have any idea how many letters my sister wrote that never reached you?" Grant froze, his gaze dropping to the pile. The envelopes were worn, some yellowed with age, their postmarks dating back 6 years. His breath caught. These were his letters. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out, as if even he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His fingers brushed over the envelopes until he recognized the handwriting. His own. Grant picked up one letter, unfolded it, and his eyes skimmed the words. "Talia, I don't know where you are, but I will never stop looking for you. If there is any reason you left, I need to know. I love you. Come back to me." The world around Grant crumbled. He flipped through letter after letter, each one carrying his words, his desperate pleas, his unanswered questions, the helpless grief of a man who had believed he had been abandoned. But now, the truth was staring him in the face. These letters had never reached Talia. Grant's head snapped up, his expression wild with disbelief. His eyes locked onto Jeremiah. "Where did you get these?" His voice was low, but there was a storm raging beneath it. Jeremiah let out a bitter laugh, devoid of amusement. What do you think? Someone made sure my sister never saw a single word from you. Grant didn't have to ask. He already knew. There was only one person with enough power to do this. Henry Westwood. Grant's hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He turned sharply, scanning the room until he found his father. Henry remained seated, entirely at ease, as if none of this concerned him. When Grant's gaze met his, the older man simply lifted a corner of his mouth, a smile that held neither panic nor remorse. A dangerous smile. A tremor ran through Grant's body, not from fear but from rage. Talia watched him, then turned her eyes toward Henry. She wasn't surprised. She had always known. But seeing Grant unravel before the truth, watching him break under the weight of it, she couldn't say it didn't hurt. Jeremiah took a step closer, his voice dripping with contempt. Do you know what the worst part is, Westwood? He emphasized the surname like an insult. It's not that you were deceived. It's not that you lost 6 years of contact with my sister. He leaned in slightly, his stare cutting into Grant like a blade. The worst part, he hissed, is that for 6 years my sister raised her daughter alone. When Milan was sick, there was no one there. When she had to work 3 jobs just to provide, no one helped. When Milan asked about her father, she had to find the words to explain. And all that time, you, the man who should have been there, were living your privileged life, completely unaware of your own daughter's existence. The words struck Grant like a sledgehammer to the chest. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Because for the first time in his life, everything he had ever believed had shattered. Jeremiah held his gaze for a moment longer, then stepped back, his eyes filled with nothing but scorn. There you have it, Westwood, he said coldly. Now you know the truth. No one spoke, not a single word. Grant stood there, gripping the old letter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The world around him blurred. The murmurs of the guests, the curious stares, the dazzling lights overhead, all fading into the background, mere scenery behind the storm raging in his mind. He had been deceived. For 6 years, he had lived in a fabricated truth. He had believed that Talia had abandoned him, that she had chosen to leave without a word. But now, everything had flipped. He was the one who had disappeared, the one who had left her behind without ever knowing. Jeremiah remained where he was, his eyes burning with fury and contempt. Talia said nothing, but Grant could see it, the pain buried deep in her gaze. His eyes dropped to the letters. Every single one he had written. Not a single one had reached her. A crushing weight pressed against his chest, as if an invisible fist had closed around his heart. His fingers trembled as he reached for the last letter in the stack. The ink had faded slightly with time, but the handwriting, Talia's delicate script, was still clear. He drew in a shaky breath and read, Grant, if you're reading this, it means you finally found me. Or maybe someone delivered it to you, but it's already too late. I don't know if I have the strength to keep hoping anymore. I looked for you. I waited, but you vanished as if you had never existed. When I found out I was carrying your child, I was terrified. But more than that, I was happy. I thought I could tell you. I thought we could face this together. And then I heard the news that you were engaged to someone else. That was when I understood maybe you never wanted me in your life at all. But if I was wrong, if one day you learn the truth, don't forgive yourself. Don't ever forgive yourself for abandoning us. Talia. Grant felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't just a letter. It was a verdict. Pain crashed into him like a tidal wave, obliterating everything he had once believed to be true. She had waited. She had searched for him. She had believed he would come back, and all she had received was a rumor about his impending wedding to another woman. His hands trembled. He couldn't breathe. He had been lied to, not just by his father, but by fate itself. His gaze snapped to Henry Westwood. The powerful man sat there, calm as ever, as if he had always known this moment would come. Grant's voice came out hoarse, raw. It was you, wasn't it? Henry took a slow sip of his drink, then set the glass down with deliberate ease. My son, he said smoothly, I have no idea what you're talking about. His voice was steady, but there was something else in his eyes. A quiet challenge. Grant clenched his fists. The missing pieces in his mind finally locked into place, forming the full picture. Henry had intercepted every letter between him and Talia. He had fed her a lie, making her believe Grant had betrayed her. He had orchestrated everything to ensure his son would never return to the woman he deemed unworthy. And all of it for control. Grant's grip on the letter tightened until the edges crumpled in his palm. The fire that had smoldered inside him for 6 years erupted into an inferno. You did this, he seethed. For what? So I would marry Madeline? So I would follow the path you planned for me. Henry exhaled through his nose, giving a dismissive shrug. Grant, my boy, sometimes certain decisions must be made to protect the future. He tilted his head slightly, his tone sharp as a blade. Tell me, what do you think is better? A life with a woman beneath your status, or a marriage to the Sinclairs? An alliance that would put you at the top of the financial world? Grant stared at his father, disgust and rage swirling inside him. So you destroyed my life, he bit out. Made me a villain in Talia's eyes? Henry didn't so much as flinch. He simply lifted a brow, his indifference chilling. Do you really believe that if you had stayed with her, things would have been better? His voice dropped, his words slow and deliberate. The truth, Grant, is that if you had chosen her, you wouldn't have anything you have now. No power, no position. You would be just another ordinary man, trapped in an ordinary life. Grant felt his blood boil. He had always known his father was ruthless. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. A deadly silence settled over the room. But not everyone remained still. From across the hall, Madeline Sinclair stood frozen. She had heard everything. And for the first time in her life, she began to question the family she had always trusted. Madeline Sinclair stood on the stage, her hands ice cold, the bridal bouquet forgotten on the floor. She watched in silence as the storm unfolded before her, a storm she had never prepared for. Today was supposed to be the most important day of her life. She was supposed to be the center of this ceremony. But instead, another woman had walked in, carrying a child. Grant's child. Something inside her cracked. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was something far worse. Fracture. She had always believed she and Grant were the perfect match. Not because of passionate love, but because they made sense. They came from powerful families. They shared the same foundations, the same future mapped out in careful, strategic lines. She had thought she knew everything there was to know about Grant Westwood. But now, watching the way he looked at Talia, the way he stood frozen before Milan, Madeline realized something. There was a part of Grant she had never touched. And the worst part? Maybe that part had never belonged to her at all. Her fingers curled into fists as she turned to Henry Westwood. The powerful man sat unmoved, calm, unbothered, unaffected, as if he had always known this moment would come. A quiet suspicion crept into Madeline's mind. She had always admired Henry, his brilliance, his control, his ability to lead without hesitation. She had grown up in a world where marriages were not just about love, but about power, about alliances carefully crafted to serve a greater purpose. And Henry Westwood was one of the greatest players in that game. But something was wrong. A woman's intuition whispered that he was involved in all of this. She took a step back. From this angle, she could see Henry murmuring something to an aide, a man dressed in black, his face devoid of expression. The aide nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd. Madeline frowned. What were they doing? Her gaze flickered back to Grant. He stood frozen, his grip on the crumpled letter tight, his eyes red with fury and pain. For the first time, she saw Grant stripped of his cold, calculated control. For the first time, he looked like a man who had been truly broken. And that was when the truth settled in her chest. She and Grant had never really loved each other. They were simply two pieces placed on a much larger chessboard. A game likely orchestrated by Henry Westwood and the Sinclair family long before either of them had a choice. She had thought she understood this game, but maybe she was just another pawn. Her eyes returned to Henry. The man still sat there, untouched by the chaos unraveling around him, his composure unshaken. But for the first time, Madeline wasn't so sure. For For the first time, she felt the need to uncover the truth. For the first time, she doubted the family she had trusted her entire life. And for the first time, she wondered if she truly wanted to become a part of this family at all. The answer slowly formed in her mind, and it terrified her. The grand hall of the Westwood estate was drowning in an eerie silence. The crystal chandeliers still shone brilliantly. The soft melody of the orchestra still drifted through the air, but no one paid attention to any of it. Glasses of wine remained frozen mid-air. Conversations had died out completely. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the stage, waiting for an answer. At the center of the storm, Grant Westwood stood motionless. In less than an hour, his entire world had been turned upside down. Not only had he discovered that he had a child, a little girl with the same striking blue eyes, a living, breathing part of him, but he had also learned that for 6 years, he had been living inside a lie crafted by his own father. His heartbeat pounded so hard he could hear it echoing in his chest. His breaths were heavy, uneven. He tried to think, tried to regain control, but his mind felt like a shattered mirror, jagged pieces of truth cutting into him, each revelation more agonizing than the last. Madeline was still standing there, the bride of the evening, the woman who was supposed to be the center of this day, now pushed to the sidelines of her own story. She didn't speak, but her eyes said too much. Not anger, not blame, doubt. She had always known Grant wasn't a romantic man. She had never believed their marriage would be a fairy tale, but she had thought they had something solid, a foundation of trust, understanding, compatibility. And yet now, in this moment, she realized perhaps she had never truly known Grant Westwood, and perhaps he had never truly belonged to her. Across the room, Talia Robinson remained still. She didn't move forward, didn't try to explain. She simply waited. Once she had loved Grant, loved him with a reckless, foolish heart. But 6 years had taught her that love could not survive where trust had been broken. She had not come here to beg, not to demand. She had come so Milan could know the truth. But even so, even after preparing herself for this moment, it hurt more than she had expected. Between Grant and Talia, Milan clung tightly to her mother's hand. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the tension crackling in the air. Her blue eyes flitted from one unfamiliar face to another, before finally settling on the tall man before her. The man her mother said was her father. A minute passed, then another. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. And then, breaking through the suffocating silence, Madeline reached for the microphone. She didn't look at anyone else. She only looked at Grant. Madeline Sinclair stood at the center of the grand stage, gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The pristine white of her wedding gown hugged her flawless figure, but no one was admiring its elegance anymore. No one had expected the bride of the evening to find herself in a moment like this. Her gaze swept across the room. The guests remained seated, some shifting uneasily in their chairs, others whispering behind gloved hands. She could feel their stares, a mix of curiosity and quiet pity pressing down on her. She had thought she was prepared for anything, but this? No one could ever be prepared for this. She swallowed hard, then turned to Grant. He was still standing there, tall, motionless, like a man thrown into a reality he had no idea how to navigate. Grant Westwood, the man she was supposed to marry, could not take his eyes off another woman. Not her, Talia Robinson. And more than that, the child. Madeline's gaze shifted to Milan, the small girl tucked close to her mother's side. A child with soft brown curls, sun-kissed skin, and eyes as blue as an autumn lake. The Westwood blue. Grant's blue. Her chest tightened. She didn't need a DNA test. She already knew the truth. That child was Grant's daughter. And the cruelest part of all, he had only just found out. Another heavy silence stretched through the room before Madeline finally lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice was steady, but there was something hauntingly quiet about it. Grant. His name echoed through the vast space, cutting through the suffocating tension like a blade. Grant flinched, Like a man jolted awake from a dream he hadn't realized he was trapped in. He turned. For the first time since this nightmare began, he truly looked at Madeline. Their eyes met. She held his gaze for a long time. There was no anger, no tears, just one question. Do you love me? The words fell into the silence like a stone breaking the still surface of a lake. No one moved. No one spoke. Grant parted his lips, but no sound came. No immediate affirmation. No resolute answer. Only silence. And in that silence, Madeline understood everything. Lowering the microphone, she exhaled softly. And then she smiled. A sad, knowing smile. And he couldn't answer right away. Grant's silence rang louder than any words ever could. Nothing in this world was more brutal than hesitation. Madeline had always believed herself to be a woman of intellect, someone who understood power plays, who knew how a marriage could be built without the need for sentimental illusions. She had never been one to believe in fairy tales. But at this moment, she realized a bitter truth. Even without love, a marriage could not survive without trust. And between her and Grant, there had never been any. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. Slowly, with deliberate grace, Madeline raised her hand and slid the glittering engagement ring from her finger. The entire room held its breath. Everyone knew what she was about to do, but no one dared to stop her. With the poise she had been raised to embody, she placed the ring on the table before her, her fingertips grazing the polished wood as if engraving this moment into memory. She lifted her gaze, meeting Grant's eyes one last time. This time, she no longer needed an answer from him, because she had already found one for herself. Marriage is built on trust, she said, her voice soft yet resounding through the room. Without it, what else is left? A silence stretched between them. And then, with an elegance that could not be denied, Madeline turned and walked away. No tears, no second glance. She left before Grant could say a single word. And with each resolute step, the wedding was over. The grand doors of the Westwood estate had barely closed behind Madeline, yet the echoes of what had just transpired still lingered in the air. The wedding was over, not with a scandalous outburst, not with a storm of rage, but with a quiet, irrevocable fracture. Grant remained where he stood, his gaze locked onto the engagement ring Madeline had left on the table. The platinum band gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, but to him, it was nothing more than the remnants of a life he once thought he would step into. Now, everything had changed. No wedding, no preordained future, only a single, undeniable truth he could no longer escape. He had a daughter, and he had lost 6 years of being her father. The weight in the room was suffocating. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, caught between leaving and lingering, unsure how to navigate the aftermath of what should have been the wedding of the year, now reduced to a story no one had seen coming. Then, shattering the prolonged silence, a voice rang out. "Well done, Grant." Grant's body stiffened. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Henry Westwood. The older man rose from the front row with a slow, deliberate grace, stepping toward his son with the kind of unshakable composure that made it clear he wasn't rattled by any of this. While everyone else had been swept into the chaos, Henry remained unbothered, as if he had foreseen it all, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in a far greater plan. Grant clenched his fists and turned to face his father, fury simmering beneath his skin. This man, his father, was the mastermind behind it all. It was him who had intercepted the letters. It was him who had rewritten Grant's fate, who had turned his life into a game of power and manipulation. And now that the truth had been laid bare, he felt no remorse. Henry stopped just before Grant, his cold eyes assessing. "You think you've won?" he murmured, a hint of mockery lacing his words. "You think this was the right move?" Grant narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping to something sharp and dangerous. "My marriage is not a business contract, Father." Henry let out a low, amused chuckle. "Oh, but it is a contract, a partnership, one that would have benefited both families. And you just threw it away for what? A moment of weakness." A muscle ticked in Grant's jaw as his fury burned hotter. Weakness? He let out a humorless laugh. You lied to me for 6 years, and you call this weakness? Henry folded his arms, unfazed. I did what was necessary. Necessary? Grant's voice was tight, controlled rage simmering beneath every syllable. Necessary for me to lose 6 years with my daughter? Necessary for Talia to raise our child alone, with no help, no support, while you made sure I would never find him? He took a step closer, his stare sharp as a blade. Or was it necessary to make sure I never had a choice in my own life? For the first time, something flickered in Henry's expression, something cold and fleeting. But he masked it just as quickly, his face settling into the same calculated indifference he always wore. Grant. His voice dropped lower, carrying a quiet warning. You don't understand. You're acting like a child. Grant smirked, though there was nothing amused about it. Then let me make myself very clear, so there's no misunderstanding. His voice was calm, unyielding, each word deliberate. I have a family. He stepped back, gaze steady. And it has no place for your schemes. Henry exhaled, his lips curling slightly. Is that so? He stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Grant's shoulder, his grip just a touch too tight. Let's see how long you last. Grant knocked his father's hand away. His gaze no longer held the look of a dutiful son. For the first time, Grant Westwood stood before Henry Westwood not as an heir, but as a man who had broken free. And Henry knew it. He didn't say it, didn't show it. But for the briefest second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he could control Grant anymore. Across the room, Talia remained still, holding Milan's hand tightly. She knew this was just the beginning. The real storm had yet to come. But at least now, one thing was certain. Grant knew the truth. And that was enough. For now. Because this time, maybe, he wouldn't leave. Grant Westwood stood motionless in the opulent hall, but inside, everything had shattered. The engagement ring still lay on the table, a symbol of the future he had just walked away from. Around him, the guests began to slip out quietly, each understanding that there was nothing left to celebrate tonight. No one spoke to him. No one dared to approach. He had always believed that losing something important would break him. But in this moment, he realized the thing he had truly lost was not Madeline. It was 6 years of being a father. Milan. Her name echoed in his mind like a siren. For the first time in his life, Grant didn't care about society's judgment, about the whispers behind closed doors, about the reputation of the Westwood name. None of it mattered. He had a daughter, and he couldn't lose her for another second. After leaving the Westwood estate, Talia took Milan to a small hotel in the heart of the city. She wasn't ready to return to California just yet. She needed time. She needed to figure out what came next. Milan had fallen asleep in the taxi, exhausted from a day far too overwhelming for a child. As Talia carried her into the hotel room, she felt the soft rise and fall of her daughter's breath against her shoulder. But she also knew this wasn't over. The real storm hadn't passed. Grant would come. She didn't doubt it. Not the Grant from 6 years ago, the man controlled by his family, caught in decisions that were never his own. But the man he was now, the man who had lost 6 years with his daughter and would not allow it to happen again. When Grant stepped out of the Westwood estate, he had no destination in mind. He had no plan. All he knew was that he couldn't let Milan believe he had never cared. He couldn't let his daughter think, even for a second, that he had never loved her. And so, as the night deepened over New York, Grant Westwood found himself standing outside the hotel where Talia and Milan were staying. He didn't know if Milan would accept him. He didn't know if he could ever make up for 6 lost years. But he knew one thing. He would not walk away. Night had fallen, but Talia remained by the window, gazing at the city lights flickering against the darkened sky. She had just finished bathing Milan, wrapping her in a soft towel before settling her into bed. "Are you sleepy, sweetheart?" she asked, gently running her fingers through Milan's damp curls. Milan rubbed her eyes, but shook her head. Not yet. Talia smiled faintly, but she knew the truth. Her daughter's mind was still tangled in the events of the evening. Tonight, Milan had met her father for the first time, and she still didn't know what to make of it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the quiet room. Talia knew who it was. She drew in a steady breath before resting a hand on Milan's small shoulder. "Stay here, love." Milan nodded. Talia stood, crossed the room, and unlocked the door. Grant Westwood stood on the other side. The golden hallway light cast shadows over his sharp features, accentuating the exhaustion in his face. He no longer carried the cold, distant air of the man he once was. This time, there was something different in his eyes. Worry, fear, and the faintest glimmer of hope. He had already lost Talia. He couldn't lose Milan, too. Grant swallowed hard before speaking, his voice low, rough. "Can I come in?" Talia didn't answer immediately. She simply watched him, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, without a word, she stepped aside. Grant entered, and as his eyes swept the room, they landed on Milan. The little girl sat on the bed, clutching a small stuffed bear against her chest. She stared at him with wide, curious eyes, unsure of the man who had just walked in. Milan had never met her father before, but tonight she had heard her mother call this man Dad. Grant took slow, measured steps forward. He stopped a few feet from the bed, careful not to startle her. Taking a steady breath, he crouched down to her level, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "Milan, I'm Grant. It's very nice to meet you." The little girl didn't respond right away. Her blue eyes studied his face, tracing every feature, searching for something familiar. Then, without a word, she shifted backward, tucking herself behind her mother. Grant's heart clenched. He had prepared himself for many possibilities, but nothing could have braced him for the pain of seeing his daughter afraid of him. Milan didn't step closer. She didn't smile. Instead, her small voice rose in the quiet room, soft, but each word sliced through Grant like a knife. "If you really love me," she whispered, "then why are you only here now?" Grant froze. He had no idea how to answer. Grant had never been a man at a loss for words. He was raised in a family where negotiations were a way of life, where words were weapons, where he always knew exactly what to say to win. But standing here, before a 5-year-old girl, he couldn't find a single thing to say in his own defense. Milan stared at him, her striking blue eyes, the very same shade as his, filled with innocent doubt. No anger, no resentment, but no trust either, and that hurt more than anything. Grant parted his lips, ready to say something, that he didn't know, that if he had known, he would have come sooner, that he had never stopped loving her. But what did those words mean to a child who had waited 6 years for a father she had never met? He swallowed hard, the weight of failure pressing down on him. Milan didn't accept him, and he deserved that. The little girl took a small step back, pressing closer to her mother, as if Talia was the only safe haven in her world. "Talia." Grant slowly turned his gaze to the woman who had once been his entire world. She had been silent this whole time, watching but never interfering. She hadn't pushed Milan toward him. She hadn't held her back, either. She had let things unfold as they would. And, somehow, that hurt even more. Grant inhaled deeply, forcing down the emotions clawing at his chest. He couldn't demand Milan's love. He couldn't undo 6 lost years in a single moment. But he could start somewhere. Turning fully to Talia, he held her gaze, his voice low, steady. "What do I have to do?" Talia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "To make Milan accept me," Grant continued, unflinching. "To make her trust me." This time, Talia exhaled softly, then met his eyes head on. "You can't be a father just by saying you are," she said, her voice quiet but sharp as steel. "You have to prove it." Grant's jaw tightened. "Ow!" Talia crossed her arms, as if she had already considered this. "You can start by staying." Her words were slow, deliberate. No disappearing. No showing up once and leaving. You have to be here. You have to show Milan that you truly want to be her father. A challenge, not a cruel one. Not an open door, either. A path, one he had to walk on his own. Grant nodded, his eyes burning with a newfound determination. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he had to do. Grant clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on Milan's door. He hadn't been here for 6 years, but from this moment on, he wouldn't leave again. Taking a slow, steady breath, He stepped forward, pressing a hand against the cool wooden surface. A fragile connection, but a connection nonetheless. I won't give up on you, Milan. His voice was deep and warm. Not a plea, not an empty promise. A vow. No response came from inside. Grant closed his eyes for a second, then let his hand drop. He turned to face Talia. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze sharp yet laced with something softer, but not with surrender. Talia had endured too many promises without action. She wasn't easy to convince anymore. Grant met her eyes. He knew what she was waiting for. A reason, a commitment, proof that he wouldn't disappear like he had 6 years ago. He exhaled, his voice steady. Talia, I know you don't trust me right now, and I don't blame you for that. Talia arched a brow, her voice calm but edged. So you think I should? Grant didn't look away. No, but I'll make you. Something flickered in her eyes, something unreadable, quick, gone in an instant. But she didn't back down. Her voice dropped, filled with the weight of all the years she had carried alone. Do you have any idea how many times Milan cried because she didn't have a father? Her tone was quiet, but it cut deep. Do you know how many times she watched other kids with their dads, dropping them off at school, holding them in their arms, then turned to me and asked why hers never came? Grant felt his throat tighten. Talia's voice didn't waver. Do you know what I had to tell her? She let out a slow breath, the ache of the past woven into her every word. I had to lie. I had to tell her that her father was a good man, that for some reason he couldn't be here. I had to create someone better than the reality you left behind. Grant closed his eyes briefly, his hands clenched at his sides. He couldn't argue, because she was right. When he opened his eyes again, his voice was lower, steadier, but his gaze burned with unshakable resolve. I can't change the last 6 years, but I won't let them stretch into another day. Talia pressed her lips together, something in her expression wavering, but not enough. Not yet. Grant stepped forward. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and, right in front of Talia, he deleted his assistant's number. He erased his upcoming meetings. He silenced every work notification. Talia frowned. What are you doing? Grant slid the phone back into his pocket, his gaze unwavering. I'm doing what I should have done 6 years ago. I'm putting my family first. Something shifted in Talia's expression. For the first time tonight, her eyes softened. Maybe just a little. But for Grant, that was enough. For now, it was a start. Late at night, Talia sat beside Milan's bed, the soft glow of the night light casting gentle shadows across her daughter's small face. Milan's breathing was even, but Talia knew she wasn't asleep. Since Grant had left, Milan had been unusually quiet. Normally, she would chatter about her day, curl up against her mother, whispering silly childhood stories. But tonight, she simply lay still, wide eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if something far too big for a 5-year-old to understand was turning over in her mind. Talia ran her fingers gently through Milan's curls, feeling the soft strands slip between her fingertips. Finally, after a long silence, Milan spoke. Mommy, does Daddy really love me? The question made Talia pause. She looked down at her daughter, her heart tightening. 6 years of raising Milan alone had taught her how to carry the weight of these innocent but painful questions, how to shield, how to protect, how to soften the sharp edges of the truth. But tonight, Milan's father had finally come. And this time, she couldn't avoid the question. Talia took a slow breath before answering. Your daddy may not be perfect, she said gently, choosing her words carefully. But if he truly loves you, you'll feel it. Milan was quiet, something unreadable flickering in her young eyes. Then, after a few seconds, she nestled closer to her mother. I don't know, she whispered, but I think I want to find out. Talia closed her eyes and held her daughter close. For the first time, a sliver of hope. Grant left Talia's apartment with a heavy weight pressing against his chest. He had thought that meeting his daughter would bring him clarity, that seeing Milan would somehow make everything fall into place. But instead, she had stepped back. She hadn't accepted him. She hadn't run into his arms like in the quiet fantasies he had foolishly allowed himself to imagine. And Talia, she remained as unwavering as ever. You can't be a father just by saying you are. You have to prove it. The words echoed in his mind like a sentence passed down in a courtroom. He knew he wouldn't give up, but before he could move forward, before he could leave his old life behind and go to California, there was something he needed to do. He needed to see Madeline. Grant had never been the kind of man to walk away without an explanation. Madeline deserved to hear the truth, not through headlines or whispers, but from him. She wasn't the woman he loved, but she had once stood by his side, and she had the right to know. So that night, he sent her a single message. "Can we meet?" The reply came sooner than he expected. "Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Lou Jardin." No accusations. No questions. Grant stared at the message for a long moment, then exhaled. Tomorrow, he would face Madeline one last time. And after that, he would leave New York. For good. New York, late afternoon. Inside Le Jardin, the warm glow of the chandeliers bathed the elegant tables in golden light, the rich scent of wine lingering in the air. The restaurant exuded refinement, sophistication, everything Grant Westwood had once considered familiar. But now, New York felt like a city he no longer belonged to. Madeline Sinclair had arrived first. She sat poised at the table, cradling a cup of Earl Grey with effortless grace. Though it had been only 2 days since her wedding was called off, there was no trace of distress on her face. Madeline Sinclair was not a woman who crumbled easily. When Grant walked in, their eyes met for a brief second. No anger, no blame, just quiet understanding. He approached, pulled out a chair, and sat down. There was no need for small talk. "I needed to see you," Grant said. Madeline set her teacup down, the delicate porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. Her blue eyes shimmered with sharp amusement. "Took you long enough." Grant stilled. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head slightly, resting an elbow on the table, her voice light yet unwavering. "Grant, I've always known you didn't belong to me." His brow furrowed. She smiled, not with bitterness, but with relief. "You may not have realized it before, but I did. The moment I saw the way you looked at her." She paused, voice turning almost weightless. "The way you looked at Talia." Something stirred in Grant's chest, a deep, resounding ache. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He had once believed he and Madeline were perfect for each other, not because of love, but because they made sense. But compatibility could never replace love. His voice dropped. "I'm sorry, Madeline." She shook her head, her expression calm. "You don't have to be, because I'm not heartbroken." Grant remained silent. "You know," she continued, her gaze sharpening just slightly, "after the wedding, I did my own digging, and I found quite a few interesting things." She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, and placed it in front of him. Grant hesitated, then opened it, and there it was. Financial transactions between Henry Westwood and various media outlets. Emails exchanged between Henry and his closest advisors. Proof that letters had been intercepted, letters Grant had sent to Talia, but that never reached her hands. His entire body went rigid. He had known his father had orchestrated everything, but holding the proof in his hands, seeing the undeniable evidence, felt like a final blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Grant murmured, unable to finish the sentence. Madeline's voice was quiet but firm. "He's been controlling your life for a long time, Grant." Grant set the folder down, his fists clenching at his sides. Henry Westwood had never tolerated losing control. Grant had spent years believing he had been making his own decisions, when in reality, his father had always been one step ahead, moving him like a chess piece. Madeline watched his reaction, then leaned back slightly, her voice carrying an almost lazy amusement. "So tell me, why are you still sitting here?" Grant blinked, looking at her in confusion. She smirked. "Talia and Milan are already gone." She tapped a manicured finger against the table. "You should be following them." The words hit him like ice water. Madeline sighed, shaking her head. "You know, Grant, I always thought you were a man who knew exactly what he wanted." She lifted her cup, took a slow sip. "But if you still don't know where you're supposed to be, then you're even more of an idiot than I thought." For the first time in days, Grant let out a quiet chuckle. This was Madeline. No tears, no bitterness, just the sharp, undeniable truth. She placed the teacup down, her gaze locking onto his. You've already lost 6 years. Her voice softened, losing its teasing edge. How many more are you willing to waste? Grant's chest tightened. 6 years. He couldn't lose another. Pushing back his chair, he stood, gathering the folder in his hands. His eyes met Madeline's one last time, filled with something he rarely ever showed, gratitude. Thank you. She shrugged, smiling faintly. Go, Grant. He didn't hesitate. Without another word, Grant turned and strode out of the restaurant. And this time, he knew exactly where he was going. California, a quiet morning. The taxi rolled to a stop in front of a small apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Far from the towering skyscrapers of New York, far from the glittering lights and extravagant parties. Life here was simple. It was the life Talia had chosen for herself in Milan for the past 6 years. She stepped out first, pulling a small suitcase behind her. Milan was still fast asleep in the back seat, her tiny head resting against Talia's arm, her face peaceful, untouched by the storm of emotions the adults around her were battling. Talia bent down and gently stroked her daughter's hair. Milan, we're home. The little girl stirred, her thick lashes fluttering. Then, as if recognizing where she was, she rubbed her eyes and curled closer against her mother. Home. This was her safe place. A place where she didn't have to be afraid of someone walking in and turning her world upside down. Talia lifted Milan into her arms, grasped the suitcase with her free hand, and made her way up the familiar steps. But just as she reached for the door, a deep voice called from behind. Talia. She froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Slowly, she turned. Grant Westwood. He stood there in the soft morning sunlight, dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans, so different from the impeccably tailored suits from the cold, composed businessman she had once known. No more boardroom polish. No more the man shaped by a world of power and control. Just a man who carried both determination and heartbreak in his eyes. He had come. He had truly come. Talia met his gaze, something unsteady shifting inside her. But she pushed it down, keeping her expression calm. She wasn't surprised. She had known Grant wouldn't give up so easily. What are you doing here? Her voice was not harsh, but held no warmth either. Grant's gaze flickered to Milan, softening as he took in the way she clung to her mother. I'm here to prove I mean it. Talia frowned slightly. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Grant took a breath, steady and sure. I rented an apartment nearby. Talia stilled. What? He slid his hands into his pockets, his stance unwavering. I'm not here as a visitor. I'm not here to say a few words and disappear back to New York. His voice was quiet but resolute. I'm here to stay. Talia studied him carefully, searching for any sign that this was a fleeting impulse, a moment of guilt or regret. But all she found was conviction. She inhaled deeply, keeping her tone even. What exactly do you expect, Grant? That you show up here and Milan will instantly call you dad? That she'll run into your arms as if the past 6 years never happened? Her words were sharp, a blade of truth. But Grant didn't flinch. He simply shook his head, his voice lowering, stripped of all pretense. I don't expect anything. I just know that if I want a chance, I have to start somewhere. Silence stretched between them. The soft morning breeze, the only sound in the quiet hallway. Talia held his gaze for a long time before exhaling, her eyes sharp. All right, she said slowly, but this is between you and Milan. I won't help you. Grant nodded. I don't expect you to. An unspoken understanding passed between them. No empty promises. No belated apologies. Just a man trying to be a father. And a mother who wouldn't let emotions cloud her judgment. This time, Grant Westwood would have to prove himself. On his own. California, a crisp morning. Grant stood outside Talia's apartment, his heart pounding harder than it should. Today would be his first full day alone with Milan. He had never been nervous walking into billion-dollar negotiations, never second-guessed himself in high-stakes deals. But the thought of spending a day with his daughter, a daughter who barely knew him, made his hands clammy in a way nothing else ever had. The door swung open, and Talia appeared. Arms crossed, eyes sharp, scanning him from head to toe, measuring, assessing. "Are you sure about this?" Grant nodded. "I'm sure." Talia hesitated for a moment, then turned and called inside. "Milan, sweetheart, come here." A small figure emerged from behind the door. Milan stood there, clutching her stuffed bear tightly, her blue eyes filled with quiet hesitation. Grant's chest tightened. He wanted to step forward to reach out, but he knew this had to be her choice. Talia crouched beside Milan, brushing her fingers gently through her daughter's hair. "You're going to spend the day with your dad, okay?" Milan pressed her lips together, saying nothing at first. Her gaze lingered on Grant, studying him in a way that made his stomach clench. Finally, she gave a small nod. Grant exhaled softly, relief washing through him. But he knew this was only the first step. Talia met his gaze, her expression a mix of warning and something softer. "Be careful with your promises, Grant." His response was immediate, unwavering. "I won't let her down." Then he extended his hand toward Milan. "Let's go, sweetheart." Milan didn't take his hand, but she followed him out the door. And for today, that was enough. Grant's plan, he had thought through every detail. No grand gestures, no overwhelming experiences. Just a simple, easy day, a morning at the park, a quiet lunch, an afternoon at the play center. But nothing went as he had imagined. Milan kept her distance. When Grant tried to make conversation, she answered in short, clipped sentences. When he bought her ice cream, she took it without a word of thanks. When he told her a silly story, she simply stared, expression unreadable. Grant had been naive to think that a single day could erase 6 years of absence. Frustration gnawed at him, but then something far worse happened. Milan went missing. The mall, Grant's panic. It had only been a brief stop, just a quick visit to let Milan pick out a book. One moment, she had been beside him. The next, she was gone. The air in Grant's lungs vanished. He spun around, heart pounding, eyes scanning the sea of strangers. Milan. No response. A primal fear surged through him. If he lost her, he couldn't even finish the thought. He rushed to the nearest employee, voice tight with urgency. "My daughter is missing." A 5-year-old girl, brown hair, blue dress. And then he saw her, curled up in a corner, clutching her stuffed bear, looking so heartbreakingly small. Grant ran to her, dropping to his knees. "Milan." She looked up at him, her big blue eyes filled with confusion and something else, something raw, something vulnerable. Relief flooded him, an overwhelming urge to pull her into his arms. But as he reached for her, she flinched and pulled back. And then, in a voice so small it nearly broke him, she asked, "Are you going to leave me again?" The word struck him harder than any punch ever could. Grant's throat closed up. He wanted to tell her no, that he would never, that he hadn't known, that he would do anything to change the past. But no excuse would be enough. Milan held his gaze for a second longer, then lowered her head. "I knew it," she whispered. Grant felt his heart crack wide open, not because she hated him, but because she had grown so used to not having him. And that was his fault. Grant swallowed hard. He wanted to reach out, to pull his daughter into his arms, to promise her that she would never have to feel abandoned again. But he knew words meant nothing to Milan right now. She had spent 6 years learning how to live without him. Milan dropped her gaze, fingers clutching the hem of her dress, her tiny shoulders trembling ever so slightly. She didn't cry, but the hurt in her eyes was undeniable. A wave of helplessness crashed over Grant. How could he make her believe him? How could he erase 6 years of absence? He took a slow, steady breath, forcing his voice to stay gentle. "Milan, I was wrong." The little girl's head lifted just slightly, wide blue eyes blinking up at him in surprise. Grant held her gaze, his own voice low, raw. "I have no excuse." His throat tightened. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Milan didn't say a word, but at least she didn't step further away. Talia had barely stepped into the shopping center when she saw them. Grant, kneeling in front of Milan, his hands resting helplessly on his knees. Milan, curled up on a small bench, clutching her stuffed bear like a lifeline. And the look in Grant's eyes. Talia didn't even have to ask. She knew something had shaken him to his core. Taking a slow breath, she approached. Milan. At the sound of her voice, Milan instantly stood and ran toward her. She grasped her mother's hand, holding tight. But this time, she didn't hide behind her. Grant rose to his feet, silent. His gaze met Talia's, conflicted, unreadable. Finally, Talia knelt down and gently brushed Milan's hair back. "Sweetheart, do you want to go home?" Milan nodded. Grant felt his entire body go rigid. "Is that it? Is this over?" Milan still didn't trust him. She still wasn't sure he wouldn't leave again. But Grant knew. He couldn't force her to believe him. Talia studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke. "You can't expect her to accept you overnight, Grant." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. "I know." She nodded, then glanced at Milan. "Say goodbye to your dad, sweetheart." Milan hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then, slowly, she turned to look at Grant. "Bye, Daddy." 2 simple words. And yet, Grant felt his chest tighten, his throat constrict. For the first time, Milan had called him Daddy. There was still distance in her voice. Still uncertainty. But at least, it was a beginning. Late night, California. The small apartment complex was cloaked in silence. In the distance, the faint hum of traffic drifted from the main road. But inside Talia's home, there was only the soft, steady rhythm of Milan's breathing as she slept. Talia pulled the blanket up over her daughter, smoothing a gentle hand over her soft curls. Today had been a long day, too many emotions, too many things for a 5-year-old to process. She stepped back, watching Milan's delicate features bathe in the warm glow of the nightlight. Milan was still uncertain about Grant, but at least she hadn't completely shut him out. It was progress. A small step. Talia exhaled quietly, then slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Stepping onto the balcony, she wasn't surprised to see a familiar figure. Grant sat on the bench outside the apartment complex, staring up at the star-dotted sky. She had expected him to be gone by now, but she should have known better. Crossing her arms, she leaned against the railing and spoke. "Why are you still here?" Grant flinched slightly, but didn't turn around. Instead, he let out a quiet chuckle. "I didn't think it would be this hard." Talia raised a brow. "What did you expect? That you'd show up and Milan would run into your arms?" Grant let out a soft laugh, but there was something bitter in it. "Maybe I let myself believe that." She didn't say anything. She didn't want to hurt him, but the truth was Grant needed to understand that Milan's love wasn't something he could claim overnight. It had to be earned, piece by piece. Grant clasped his hands together, staring at the ground. His voice was quieter now. "I feel like a stranger to my own daughter." Talia sighed, because in many ways, he was. But she didn't say that. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "If you really want to be her father, you don't get to give up." Grant turned then, meeting her gaze. And there was something different in his eyes. Determination. Resolve. "I'm not giving up." Talia stilled. She had expected exhaustion, frustration, maybe even defeat. But what she saw instead was a man who was ready to fight for something real. For the first time that night, she didn't see the Grant she used to know. Not the man who had once let go of her because of pressure, expectation, fear, but someone different. A man trying, really trying, to be a father. She studied him for a long moment, letting the silence settle between them. Maybe he had changed. But would it last? She didn't know. Only time would tell. California, early morning. The sun had yet to fully rise, but soft, golden light filtered through the trees, casting a delicate mist over the quiet apartment complex. Talia stood in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee, her movements slow, still carrying the weight of morning fatigue. She had just finished packing Milan's lunch. These early morning routines had become second nature to her over the past 6 years. But today, something was different. Someone was standing outside her door. Knock, knock, knock. Talia glanced at the clock. It was still early. She took a deep breath, set her coffee down, and walked to the door. When she opened it, Grant Westwood stood there, dressed simply in a button-down shirt and jeans, a takeaway coffee cup in hand. He no longer looked like the cold, untouchable businessman from New York. There was something raw about him now, something honest. Talia crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "You're here early." Grant studied her for a moment before speaking, his voice steady. "I want to be a part of Milan's life. Not just here and there. I want to be in it. For real." Talia didn't look surprised. She had been expecting this, but she also knew that wanting to be a father wasn't enough. She held his gaze for a long moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Then, finally she spoke. "All right, if you really want a role in Milan's life, you have to start with the small things." Grant raised a brow. "What do you mean?" Talia's expression remained calm, but there was an undeniable challenge in her voice. "For 1 week, you'll take Milan to school every morning." Grant blinked, clearly not expecting that. "That's it." Talia's lips curved into the faintest smile, though there was something sharp behind it. "That's it. But you won't just drive her to school." Her voice was measured, deliberate. "You'll help her get ready. You'll talk to her. You'll build the kind of routine a real father should. And if, after a week, Milan feels more comfortable with you, then you'll have a chance to do more." A pause. Grant remained silent for a few seconds, processing. He understood. This wasn't just a simple task. Talia was testing him, not to punish him, but to see if he had the patience, the consistency, the commitment to truly be in Milan's life. Finally, he nodded. His voice was firm. "I accept." Talia studied him for another moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "Good. See you tomorrow morning." She shut the door, leaving Grant standing in the hallway. But this time, he didn't feel shut out, because this time he had a chance, and he wouldn't waste it. Day 1. Grant arrived at Talia's door at exactly 6:45 a.m., just as he had promised. He had prepared meticulously, reading countless articles on building relationships with daughters, even asking a few friends with kids for advice. But the moment the door opened, he realized something. Theory and reality were two very different things. Milan stood there in her tiny school uniform, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. Her eyes no longer held fear when she looked at him, but there was no excitement either. "Good morning, Milan." Grant crouched slightly, keeping his voice as gentle as possible. Milan nodded, but said nothing. From the kitchen, Talia placed a lunchbox into Milan's backpack. "You two should go, and don't forget the seatbelt." Milan didn't need the reminder. She climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in without hesitation. Grant followed, sliding into the driver's seat, searching for a way to break the silence. As he started the engine, he asked softly, "What kind of music do you like in the morning?" Milan shook her head. "Nothing." Grant swallowed. He kept trying. "What subject do you have today?" "Math." "Do you like math?" "No." Grant chuckled. "Me neither. I hated math when I was little." He waited, hoping for a smile, a response, something. But Milan just stared out the window, silent. A knot tightened in his chest. He had assumed, maybe foolishly, that she would at least be curious about him. But she wasn't ready, and he couldn't force it. So today, maybe he wouldn't be part of her world just yet. But at the very least, he could make sure she got used to having him in it. He kept driving, glancing occasionally at her through the rearview mirror. She didn't say much, but at least she had gotten in the car with him, and that was a start. Day 2. This time, when Grant arrived, Milan was already waiting at the door, backpack in hand. She still didn't say much, but at least she wasn't avoiding him. When they got in the car, Grant decided to try something different. He turned on a soft piano melody, nothing too loud, nothing too cheerful, just something calm. 1 minute passed, then 2, then from the back seat. "What song is this?" Grant still surprised, but he hit it quickly. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "It's just instrumental. Do you like it?" Milan gave a small nod, and Grant felt something in his chest loosen. Maybe words weren't the most important thing right now. Maybe she just needed to get used to him being there. So he drove a little slower, letting himself enjoy the first peaceful moment between them. Day 3. That morning, as they crossed the street toward the school entrance, Milan reached for Grant's hand. It was light, barely there, but to Grant, it felt like the entire world had shifted. He glanced down at their joined hands, warmth spreading through his chest. He didn't say anything. He just gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent promise that this time he wouldn't let go. Day 4. When Grant arrived early that morning, Milan was already waiting. She still clutched her stuffed bear, But this time, she didn't linger behind the door. She stood there naturally, as if his presence in the morning had become something expected, something familiar. And this was exactly what Grant wanted, to become a part of his daughter's life. Talia glanced between them, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. She didn't say anything, just handed Milan her lunchbox before kneeling to fix her shoelaces. When she stood, she met Grant's gaze, then gave him a small nod. It was barely anything, but to Grant, it was everything. A silent acknowledgement that she was beginning to see his effort. On the drive to school, Grant decided to try again. "What's on your schedule today?" This time, Milan didn't give him a short, dismissive answer. "Math, literature, then P." Grant raised a brow. "Do you like P?" She shrugged. "It's okay." He smiled. "I used to be great at P, especially basketball." Through the rearview mirror, he caught Milan looking at him, curiosity sparking in her expression. "You were really tall?" she asked. Grant chuckled. "Taller than most of the other kids. So whenever we played basketball, I was always picked first." Milan blinked, as if picturing it in her mind. And then, she laughed. Soft, small, but real. The first real emotion she had ever shown him. Grant's heart skipped. He had been waiting for this moment all week. For the first time, Milan wasn't just tolerating his presence. She was engaging with him. He didn't push, didn't try to extend the moment, just let it be. When they arrived at school, Grant did what he always did, got out, opened the car door for her. But today, Milan didn't rush inside immediately. She paused, looking up at him, and then, to his quiet astonishment, she lifted her hand and gave him a small wave. "Bye, Daddy." Grant stood frozen, as if time had stopped. It was just a tiny gesture, but to him, it meant everything. He took a deep breath, smiled. "Bye, sweetheart." Day 5. The morning routine was the same, until Milan stepped out of the apartment. As Grant bent down to open the car door, he felt a small tug at his sleeve. Milan, just a tiny touch, but enough to tell him that trust, fragile, hesitant, was starting to form. The drive felt different, because this time, Milan didn't stare out the window. She actually talked to him. "Daddy, today we have to draw a picture of our family." Grant's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. He kept his voice steady. "Who are you going to draw?" Milan furrowed her brows in thought. "Mommy, me, Uncle Jeremiah." Then she fell quiet. 1 second, 2, and then, in the softest whisper, "And Daddy." Grant swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed. He didn't say anything, didn't want to overwhelm her. Instead, he just smiled, because for the first time, he knew he had a place in her world, and he would never leave again. California, a late afternoon. Talia was rearranging a few design samples in her small atelier when a knock sounded at the door. She looked up, expecting a customer. But when the door opened, the person standing before her was no stranger. Henry Westwood. He was exactly as she remembered. An impeccably tailored suit, an air of composed authority, and a cold, calculating presence. A seasoned wolf, accustomed to bending the world to his will. Talia wasn't surprised. She had always known Henry would come for her sooner or later. Crossing her arms, she met his gaze with quiet resolve. "I don't believe we have anything left to discuss." Henry didn't respond immediately. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over the modest workspace. "You've chosen a very simple life, Talia." His tone was measured, but laced with quiet disdain. A life unbefitting of someone with Westwood blood. Talia's fingers curled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Milan isn't Westwood blood. She is my daughter, and you have no say in her life." Henry let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "Is that so? You think saying it makes it true?" With deliberate ease, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it on the table. $5 million. His voice was light, as if he were merely making a routine offer. "You and the girl can live comfortably, free of any worries. You could start your own fashion label. Milan could attend the best schools." Talia stared at the envelope, as though it were something filthy. Then she let out a quiet laugh. "Do you really think you can buy me?" Henry arched a brow. "Can you not think of yourself, Talia? If not for you, then for your daughter." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him, then spoke slowly, deliberately. Money can buy a lot of things, Henry, but it cannot buy family. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the air. You seem to have a talent for using money to control people's lives, don't you? Both of them turned. Jeremiah Robinson stood at the doorway, his gaze like ice. Henry showed no sign of surprise. He turned to face Jeremiah with an air of calm inevitability, as if he had anticipated this moment all along. Jeremiah stepped inside, his expression darkening as he noticed the envelope on the table. Another deal? Just like the one you made 6 years ago to buy Talia out of Grant's life? Henry didn't blink. You exaggerate. Jeremiah let out a dry laugh. Exaggerate. He took a step forward, his voice hardening. You destroyed my sister's life. You tore her away from the man she loved just because you thought Grant deserved someone better. He tossed a folder onto the table, the very same file Madeline had given Grant. Henry barely spared it a glance, his expression unchanged. Jeremiah smirked coldly. Nothing to say. Henry exhaled lightly, unfazed. You believe you're doing the right thing, Jeremiah, but you forget one truth. Talia narrowed her eyes. And what truth is that? Henry met her gaze, his own sharp and unwavering. The truth that Grant Westwood is still part of this family, and sooner or later, he will have to choose between you and them. A heavy silence settled over the room. Talia clenched her fists, but Jeremiah spoke first. His voice dropped to a dangerous low. This time you're wrong. Henry's eyes flickered. Jeremiah's smirk deepened. You think Grant will turn his back on Talia and Milan? That he's still your puppet? He stepped closer, his voice unwavering. Grant has changed, and you can't control him anymore. For the first time, Henry remained silent. And for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps caution, passed through his eyes. Because deep down, he knew Jeremiah was right. Grant had changed, and perhaps, for the first time, Henry had truly lost his grip on his son. After a long pause, Henry exhaled slowly. He cast one last glance at Talia, no longer with contempt, but with something more calculating. Very well. He picked up the envelope, adjusting his cufflinks. You've made your choice, Talia. His voice was even. Just make sure you don't regret it. And without another word, Henry turned and walked away. Talia and Jeremiah stood still, watching his figure disappear through the door. A light breeze drifted in, but neither of them moved, both keenly aware that a chapter of their lives had just closed. Jeremiah looked at his sister. Talia let out a slow breath, rubbing her temples. Jeremiah studied her for a moment, then spoke, his voice quieter. You okay? She shrugged. It doesn't scare me anymore. He observed her carefully, then gave a small nod. Grant's trying, isn't he? Talia was silent for a beat before nodding slowly. Jeremiah scoffed. I still don't like him. Talia let out a soft chuckle. I know. Then she turned to the window, watching as the city bathed in the golden hues of sunset. Henry might have walked away, but Grant's battle was far from over. That night, at Grant's apartment, Grant stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, half full, yet untouched. The city lights cast a warm golden hue on his face, but inside, his thoughts were anything but calm. He knew his father wouldn't give up easily. Henry Westwood was not a man who accepted defeat. A sudden knock, 3 firm raps against the door. Grant frowned, set his glass down, and walked over to open it. Jeremiah Robinson. The taller man stood there, arms crossed, his gaze cold as steel. We need to talk. Grant studied him for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. Jeremiah entered, his sharp eyes sweeping over the apartment. Simple, unembellished. Nothing lavish, nothing ostentatious. A stark contrast to the Grant Westwood he had once known. He didn't waste time. Your father went to see Talia. Grant tensed. He had expected this, but hearing it from Jeremiah still sent a fresh wave of anger surging through him. What did he say? His voice was low, dangerous. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. He offered her money, enough to make anyone think twice. Grant's fist clenched, and Jeremiah smirked, and she turned him down without a second thought. A slow breath escaped Grant's lips. He had never doubted Talia, but hearing it said aloud still steadied something inside him. But then Jeremiah's tone shifted, darkening. But Grant, this isn't just about money. He wasn't just trying to buy her off. He was trying to make her doubt you. Grant's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Jeremiah leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, his gaze sharp as a blade. Henry told my sister that sooner or later, you would have to choose. Between them, Jeremiah's voice hardened. And the Westwood family. Grant's jaw tightened. I already made my choice. Jeremiah let out a dry chuckle. Then tell me, what have you done to protect them? Grant froze. Jeremiah stepped closer, his voice dropping, steady but forceful. Talia may be strong, but she can't fight Henry Westwood alone. And Milan? She's just a child, Grant. If you truly love them, you can't just stand by while your father keeps trying to tear them apart. Grant took a slow, deep breath, reining in the fury rising inside him. Jeremiah watched him carefully, then gave a small nod. Good, because if you won't protect them. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes flashing a warning. I will. Grant met Jeremiah's gaze, and for the first time, he saw the man not as a rival, but as something else entirely. Not an enemy, just a brother trying to protect his sister. The same way Grant wanted to protect Milan. The two men stood in heavy silence, staring at each other. Finally, Grant gave a slow nod, his voice quiet but firm. You're right. He turned, grabbed his car keys. Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. Where are you going? Grant pulled on his jacket, his eyes harder than steel. To see Henry. New York, Henry Westwood's office. The vast office on the top floor of Westwood Group remained as imposing as ever, its glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Everything about it exuded power, a silent reminder that the man seated behind the gleaming mahogany desk never lost control. But tonight, Henry Westwood was about to lose the most important thing of all, his only son. The door swung open, and Grant stepped inside. It slammed shut behind him. He didn't sit. Henry looked up from his desk, unsurprised. He had known his son would return. Leaning back his chair, he steepled his fingers, his voice calm. So, you finally come back. Grant met his gaze, his tone cold. I haven't come back, Father. I'm here to end this. Henry didn't blink. End. Grant took a step forward. No longer the son who had once followed orders without question. You tried to control my life since I was a child. You thought you could decide who I loved, who I married, what kind of life I lived. But you were wrong. Henry let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Wrong. He stood, moving to the bar with deliberate ease, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, his demeanor unshaken. Do you really think you can escape the name Westwood, Grant? That just because you love some woman, you can erase everything you were raised to be? He turned, eyes sharp as steel. You are a Westwood, and you always will be. Grant clenched his fists. My name is Grant Westwood, but I am not your puppet. Henry raised an eyebrow. Grant took a slow breath, his voice steadier than ever. I love Talia, and I will do whatever it takes to protect her, to protect Milan, my daughter. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Henry's eyes. And what do you think she gives you in return? An ordinary life? A small, insignificant family? Do you really believe you'll be happy walking away from everything you have? Grant looked at his father, and for the first time, he felt nothing. No fear, no obligation. Only certainty. I had everything, Father, but I was never truly happy. His voice dropped, firm and unyielding. Now I know what really matters. Henry studied him, and for the first time, his gaze held neither disdain nor authority, but something closer to genuine assessment. He set his glass down and took a step closer. His voice was quieter now, tinged with something almost mocking. Is that so? And you're willing to give up this family for them? Grant didn't flinch. If that's the price of having a real family, then yes. Silence filled the room. Henry held his stare, but the man standing before him was no longer a boy under his control. Grant was a man willing to fight for what he loved. At last, Henry exhaled through his nose, turning away with a dismissive huff, as if this entire conversation had been of little consequence. Suit yourself. Grant didn't move, waiting for something, one last threat, one final attempt at manipulation. But Henry simply sat back in his chair, lifted his glass, and took a slow sip, saying nothing at all. And Grant understood. The battle was over. Not because Henry had lost, but because for the first time, he knew he could no longer control his son. Grant took a deep breath. He had waited a long time for this moment. At last, he was free of Henry Westwood's shadow. Without hesitation, he turned on his heel and strode out the door. And this time, he knew exactly where he was going. California, late night. Talia had just put Milan to sleep. Tonight, her daughter had seemed happier than usual, perhaps because she was slowly growing accustomed to Grant picking her up, dropping her off. The walls between them were starting to come down. A soft smile played on Talia's lips as she brushed a few strands of hair from Milan's forehead. Then, she rose, switched off the night light, and gently closed the door behind her. But as she stepped into the living room, she froze. Grant Westwood stood at her door. His tall frame was outlined against the doorway, his gaze filled with an unfamiliar, unwavering determination, as if he had just made a choice, one that could never be undone. Talia frowned slightly, but she stepped forward, arms crossing over her chest. "You're back." Grant held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I saw Henry." Talia stiffened. She drew in a slow breath. "And Grant didn't hesitate. I told him clearly, I chose you in Milan." His voice was low, steady. No hesitation. No invisible chains pulling him back into Henry Westwood's world. Talia stayed silent, studying his face. "What does that even mean, Grant?" He stepped forward, the deep blue of his eyes locking onto hers. "It means I've left the Westwood family." Her heart pounded. She hadn't expected him to be this absolute. Grant Westwood, the heir to an empire, had walked away from everything. For her. For Milan? She shook her head slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Do you really understand what that means, Grant? You've lived your entire life as a Westwood, as Henry Westwood's son. Are you sure you won't regret this?" Grant held her gaze. Then, gently, he reached for her hand and clasped it tightly. "I'm not giving anything up, Talia. I'm making a choice." He squeezed her hand just slightly, his voice deep, steady, each word carrying a weight that could not be ignored. "This time I choose family. I choose you. I choose Milan. Nothing else matters." Talia felt something tremble inside her. She had once loved this man deeply. She had once believed she had let him go. But now, standing here looking into his eyes, feeling the certainty in his touch, she realized one thing. He had changed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" Grant exhaled softly, then lowered his head, resting his forehead against hers. "More sure than I've ever been." And for the first time in 6 years, Talia let herself believe him. Let herself give him one more chance. California, late afternoon. The small apartment was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of a weekend afternoon. Outside the window, the sun had begun its descent, casting a soft amber glow over everything. Talia sat in the living room, folding laundry, but her eyes kept drifting toward Milan. Something was off. Normally, Milan would be bouncing around the apartment, chattering away while playing with her favorite stuffed bear. But today, she sat curled up on the sofa, clutching the bear tightly in her arms, her small face pale. Talia set the shirt in her hands aside and moved to sit beside her daughter. "Milan, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Milan nuzzled into her mother's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel a little sick." Talia pressed a gentle hand to her forehead. Burning hot. Her heart clenched. Milan had a fever. She quickly stood to grab a thermometer. Just as she turned back, the front door swung open. Grant had just walked in. "Hey," he didn't get to finish his sentence. His eyes landed on Milan, and everything else disappeared. She was slumped against the couch, her eyelids heavy, her small face flushed with fever. A sharp pang struck his chest. He moved toward her immediately, dropping to one knee. "Milan? Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Talia silently handed him the thermometer. "She has a fever." Grant took it, carefully placing it under Milan's arm. He had never felt this kind of worry before. He had learned how to pick her up from school, how to talk to her, how to listen to her endless childhood stories. But this was the first time he had ever seen her like this, small, fragile, unwell. A minute later, the thermometer beeped. 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Talia pressed her lips together, a trace of tension in her voice. It's too high. Can you get a cold compress? Grant was already on his feet, heading to the kitchen. In the brief moments it took him to soak the cloth in cold water, a strange fear settled in his chest. He had faced high-stakes negotiations. He had made billion-dollar decisions. He had stood in rooms filled with powerful men and never once wavered. But nothing had ever made him feel as helpless as this. Milan was his daughter, and he didn't know how to fix this. When he returned, Talia had already carried Milan to her bed, tucking her in gently. Grant handed her the cold compress, then, without hesitation, knelt beside the bed. His eyes never left Milan. She lay curled up, her tiny lips dry from the fever, her small fingers clutching her stuffed bear as if searching for something familiar, something safe. Grant had never hated his own powerlessness more than he did in that moment. He turned to Talia, his voice low. Do we need to take her to the doctor? Talia shook her head. Not yet. If the fever doesn't go down by morning, we'll take her in. Grant nodded, his jaw tightening. He wasn't leaving tonight. No matter what happened, he would stay. Right here, beside his daughter. California, 11:45 p.m. The soft glow of the night light cast warm shadows against the cream-colored walls of Milan's small bedroom. The silence was heavy, so still that Grant could hear the faint, uneven breaths of his daughter. She was still feverish. Curled up beneath the blankets, Milan lay restless, her little body radiating heat. Her stuffed bear remained clutched tightly in her arms, damp strands of hair sticking to her forehead. Grant sat beside her bed, unmoving, watching. Talia entered quietly, a cup of warm water in her hands. She settled on the edge of the bed, gently brushing a hand over Milan's shoulder. Sweetheart, drink some water, Milan whimpered, her eyelids fluttering open just slightly. She stirred, but lacked the strength to lift herself up. Before Talia could move, Grant had already leaned forward, carefully lifting Milan into his arms, pressing her small frame against his chest. She sagged into him, her fevered breath warm against his shirt. And for the first time, he realized just how small she was. Milan took a tiny sip of water, then instinctively nestled deeper into Grant, as if seeking comfort. Talia watched, something unspoken stirring within her. She didn't have to say it. She could see it in the way Milan held on to him. She was beginning to accept Grant, beginning to trust him. Grant eased Milan back onto the bed, tucking the blanket up to her chin. His hand lingered for a moment against her flushed cheek before he turned to Talia, his voice low. Go rest. I'll stay with her. Talia hesitated, but when she saw the resolve in his eyes, she finally gave a small nod. Wake me if anything changes. Grant nodded. She stood, stepping toward the doorway. But before she left, she didn't shut the door completely. She wanted to see him for just a little longer. And what she saw made something shift deep inside her. Grant sat motionless, his large hand caught in the grasp of Milan's tiny fingers. He wasn't sleeping. He simply held her hand, as if afraid that if he let go, she might slip away. A man who once had the world at his fingertips, now focused on only one thing, his daughter. And for the first time, Talia knew Grant was truly a father. California, 3:27 a.m. The room was silent, bathed in the soft, golden glow of the nightlight. Shadows flickered across the cream-colored walls, casting a gentle light over Milan's pale face. Grant was still there. He hadn't slept. For the first time in his life, he was staying up all night. Not for billion-dollar deals, not for high-stakes negotiations, but for the tiny girl lying in front of him. His daughter. Milan stirred, her long lashes fluttering before her eyes slowly opened. Grant immediately leaned in, his hands still wrapped around hers. He didn't want her to wake up and feel alone. Sweetheart, you're awake. Milan blinked, her breath faint and uneven. The fever had gone down slightly, but her cheeks were still flushed. She didn't respond right away. Her blue eyes, so much like his own, held something tired, something uncertain. And then, in a hoarse, fragile whisper, She asked a question that made Grant's chest tighten like a fist was squeezing his heart. "Daddy, are you going to leave again?" Grant froze. He looked into her eyes that mirrored his, but deep within them lay something that no child should ever have to feel. Fear, doubt, a silent, unspoken question. Can I trust you to stay? Grant had feared that Milan wouldn't accept him. He had feared that she would always see him as a stranger. But he had never considered that she might fear losing him even more. This wasn't something born overnight. It had grown inside her for 6 long years. It was in the way she had watched her friends being picked up by their fathers and turned to her mother to ask, "Where's my daddy?" It was in the holidays, when Talia had done everything she could to fill the void with laughter and warmth. It was in the quiet nights, when Milan had curled up with her stuffed bear, because there were no arms of a father to hold her. And now, even with Grant sitting here, she still wasn't sure. Deep down, she was still afraid that this was only temporary. Grant inhaled sharply, then leaned closer, his grip on her small hand tightening ever so slightly. "I'm not going anywhere, Milan." His voice was rough with emotion, but steady, unshakable. "I promise." Milan blinked, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, hesitantly, Milan gave his hand the tiniest squeeze. Grant felt the world still. A simple gesture, but to him, it was everything. For the first time, Milan wasn't pulling away. For the first time, she was reaching for him. Something deep and unfamiliar swelled inside Grant's chest. He was a father, not by blood, not by name, but because for the first time, his daughter truly needed him. He swallowed the lump in his throat and leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep, sweetheart. I'm right here." Milan let out a soft, relieved breath, her eyes fluttering shut. Her tiny fingers remained curled around his hand. And Grant stayed. He sat there, holding her hand in his, an unspoken promise that nothing would ever take him away again. California, dawn. Talia had never considered herself easily moved. For 6 years, she had learned to be strong, to stand on her own, to need no one. But now, as she stood in the doorway of Milan's room, watching Grant sit vigil beside their daughter, something inside her shifted, something deep, something undeniable. She had never seen him like this before. She had never seen this Grant Westwood, exhausted but unwavering, a man who had put everything else aside just to watch over a fevered little girl. This was not the Grant she once knew. The man she had loved back then had been passionate, intense, but too weak to fight for her. He had left her behind. He had been afraid. But the man sitting at Milan's bedside now, he was different. She watched the way he held Milan's tiny hand, tight, protective, as if letting go would mean losing everything. She listened to his voice, rough with emotion, yet steady as a vow. "I'm not going anywhere, Milan. I promise." She saw the way Milan hesitated, her tired eyes searching his as if testing the truth in his words. And then, in the quietest but most profound of moments, Milan squeezed his hand. Such a small gesture, but Talia knew what it meant. Her daughter had chosen to believe in him. Talia felt her throat tighten. Milan had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She had never said it out loud. But Talia was her mother, she understood. Milan had always longed for a father. For years, she had masked that longing with quiet maturity, with indifferent answers whenever someone asked about him. But deep down, she had been waiting. And tonight, at last, she had received the answer she had always needed. Grant was staying. Tears welled in Talia's eyes, but for once, she didn't try to blink them away. For the first time in 6 years, she allowed herself to let go of all the doubts. She had resented Grant. She had sworn she would never forgive him. But as she looked at the man before her, the father who had changed, the child who had finally reclaimed what was lost, she realized something. Her heart was no longer resisting. Her anger, her pain, all the wounds Grant had once inflicted, they didn't matter anymore, because he had truly come back, and she was ready to accept that. Talia makes a decision. Grant exhaled in relief when Milan's breathing evened out, her small body finally surrendering to sleep. Slowly, he rose to his feet, adjusting the blanket over her, then turned toward the door. But as he reached it, he stopped. Talia was standing there. He froze. Her eyes were damp, but there was no anger in them. No blame. Only softness. A softness he had thought he would never see again. They stood there, locked in silence, 1,000 unspoken words between them. Then at last Talia smiled. A small, hesitant smile, barely there. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You don't have to leave." Grant's breath caught in his chest. She inhaled deeply, then spoke again, her voice slow, deliberate. "If you're serious, if you really want to be here for Milan." She hesitated, as if gathering every ounce of courage she had. Then she met his gaze. "Move in." Grant couldn't breathe. She was giving him a chance. Not a test, not a trial. A home. For the first time in 6 years, he felt it. He had found where he belonged. Not in New York, not in the Westwood Empire, but here, with them. The soft morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm golden glow over the apartment. Talia stood in the kitchen, stirring a cup of coffee, but her mind was elsewhere, focused on the man in the living room. Grant sat on the floor, still in the same simple clothes from the night before, his eyes following Milan's every movement. She had just recovered, but already she was back to her cheerful self. A box of crayons in her lap. She was completely engrossed in drawing. Talia stepped closer, glancing down. It was a family portrait. In the center was Milan, holding hands with 2 taller figures. A woman with long hair, Talia, and beside her, a tall man with familiar blue eyes, Grant. Talia felt something tighten in her throat. Milan had never drawn a picture with a father before. The little girl looked up, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Mommy, do you think it's pretty?" Talia bent down, pressing a kiss to her daughter's soft hair, her voice gentle. "It's beautiful." When she lifted her gaze, she met Grant's eyes. In that moment, no words were needed. That afternoon, the 3 of them took a walk in the park near their home. Milan ran ahead, her tiny shoes crunching over fallen autumn leaves. But suddenly, she stopped and turned back. Grant and Talia halted, watching her. Milan stood there, her small hands outstretched, waiting for them to take them. Talia hesitated. She had spent years walking this path alone, just her and Milan. But this time, she looked at Grant. He didn't rush her. He didn't say a word. But in his eyes, there was a quiet, unwavering resolve. Finally, Talia reached out. Grant took her hand. Then together, they reached for Milan's. They weren't perfect. They weren't whole just yet. But they were trying. Talia looked at Grant, her voice soft. "We're not a perfect family, but at least we're trying." Grant gently squeezed her hand, his voice low and steady. "And I won't stop trying." Milan beamed, then tugged them forward, leading them ahead as a family. Grant, Talia, and Milan's story reflects a profound truth about modern life. Family is not just about blood. It's about effort, commitment, and the willingness to stay. In today's world, too many relationships fall apart because people give up too easily, because they lack patience and understanding. But like Grant, if you truly want to mend something broken, you have to fight for it. You have to prove it. Not with words, but with time and unwavering sincerity. For parents, presence will always matter more than wealth. Children don't need grand gestures or empty promises. They need love, security, and the simple assurance that they are not alone. Don't wait until it's too late to realize what truly matters. Do you believe in fate? When one door closes, another one might just open. Stay tuned for more thrilling stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe.